Hi, I'm Tom Gilson, Associate Editor of Against the Grain, and I'm here at the Charleston Conference at the Francis Marion Hotel in the Penthouse Suites, and I'm joined by Jack Montgomery, who is the Coordinator of Collection Services at Western Kentucky University. And we're here to talk to Sheila Corrall, who is Professor and Chair of the Library and Information Studies Program at the University of Pittsburgh. Dr. Corrall, welcome to the Penthouse.
Thank you. I'm very pleased to be here.
It's a delight to have you. One of the things I wanted to ask you were actually the Dean of a library school at the University of Sheffield in UK. And one of the things I was interested in was the difference between library education there and here in the States. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. My title was actually Head of the Information School because although the Sheffield School started out as a School of Librarianship in the 1960s, it expanded over the years and was actually the first iSchool in the UK, the first UK school to join the iSchools movement. And so when I was there, I was head of the school for 4 years and very much involved in all the programs and taught on all of them actually at one time, which included undergraduate course in undergraduate program in information management, as well as the master's programs in information systems and information management and health informatics, in addition to the MA in librarianship and the MSc in digital library management. So for me, the key difference in the master's program is that in the UK, and this applies, I think, in other European countries as well, because they work now to a broadly similar model. But in the UK, although the program is expected to take 1 year full time to complete in the same way that our program at Pitt does, and has the equivalent number of credits, although they're calculated in a different way. It's 180 credits in the UK and 36 credits for our masters at Pitt. Whereas the Pitt students typically take 12 courses over 3 terms, in the UK the students would typically take 8 courses, and then 1/3 of the program is a research project. Okay. And a research methods course is a mandatory component of that, and it's a required element of the program, and it's a requirement for programs to be accredited by the professional body in the UK. They will not accredit a master's program if it doesn't have a research methods course as a mandatory requirement. So that is a key difference, because in the United States, many programs do offer a research methods course, but I think it's somewhere between a half and 2/3 who have it as a mandatory element and isn't a mandatory component at Pitt.
I see.
Is there anything about the UK program that you brought to the University of Pittsburgh and incorporated?
Well, that is the first thing I did, actually, introduce a research methods course, which I teach myself. It's not a mandatory course at the moment, but it is a requirement for any students taking the academic library specialization, which I lead.
Hey, let me ask a follow-up on that. Is there there must be an expectation in UK libraries that librarians be fairly well versed in research methods then?
Well, this is the paradox, because it's actually the case in the United States that in many university libraries, librarians have or seek tenured status, and that has the similar types of requirements to faculty, where they're expected to carry out research and publish. Sure. And that is not the case in the UK. They don't have that sort of status. And although there are certain groups within the UK academic high sector who are active in going to conferences and publishing, I'm thinking particularly of the information literacy community, many others do not. So that's one of those paradoxes, I think.
Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about your program that you presented here at the conference. It was entitled The 10 Commandments of a Good Collection. Could you give us a little bit of an overview of that?
Yes. So this actually is a good example of how, despite the lack of a dissertation project being part of the US Masters, it is possible for students to carry out substantial research projects. I mean, we have an independent research course which the students can opt to do instead of one of the regular courses. And in the fall term last year, I supervised an online student taking the MLIS program online, who's working full-time at a liberal arts college. And at that time, we didn't have, at least that year, we didn't have on offer a collection development course. And she was very interested in collection development, so she wanted to do a collection development project.
Nice.
And in fact, her interest was really stimulated by the fact that she was engaged in a hands-on collection assessment project at her institution.
This had some real practical value for her.
Absolutely, and she wanted to explore further the sort of principles
Sure.
and context for carrying out that type of project. And so she embarked on what was in effect a sort of very extensive sort of critical review of the literature. And she started off with the question, you know, what is a good collection? That was where she started from. What makes a good collection? And I mean, the routine response to that is a good collection meets the needs of the institution. But then, you know, what are the qualities that actually coalesce to make that collection serve that purpose effectively? And so that's what she embarked on, and she came up with these qualities in the end, and you know, we had a lot of discussion along the way. She sent me drafts, tested ideas out of me, and I would sort of provide some critique, and we go back and forward on it. But in the end, she ended up with 10, and I suggested that the title, The 10 Commandments, would be, you know, a nice provocative title to use. And I was thinking particularly of, there's a very well-known British architect who did a lot of work in libraries in the UK and around the world, Harry Faulkner Brown, who came up with these 10 desirable qualities for library space planning. That was back in the sort of 60s. And they were called the 10 Commandments of library space planning, not by him, I hasten to add, but others gave them that label. And then Andrew MacDonald, who's a sort of library buildings guru in the UK today, who's done a lot of work internationally with the IFLA building section and so on, he has updated those, and they're part of the IFLA sort of standards on library space planning. And so we thought, you know, that title would be a nice one for us to use as well. And the idea, particularly for this conference, because you need to have something that's attention-grabbing, because you compete with so many other people for attention, because there are about a dozen sessions going on at any one time. Yeah.
I noticed that you probably were looking to obtain some feedback from the audience. Did you find anything that was particularly useful to you?
Oh, it was great, because so we'd done this project, we'd come up with our 10, and we wanted to write that up for a journal, but we felt that before we would do that, we wanted to validate our criteria and invite people to rank them in order of importance. And also, I think part of the discussion we wanted to have was whether they would be different in different types of library, because obviously they'd been developed in a particular context. Although Denise had, you know, read the literature broadly, and the literature had not been, you know, limited to an undergraduate circulating collection in a liberal arts college. Nevertheless, that was the context when she came up with her actual set of criteria. So that was a part of the motivation for holding the session. And we had a very, very good discussion. It was very lively, not a large group, probably around 30 people. It was in one of those very small rooms. But that meant that everybody contributed to the discussion, which is not always the case in these sessions. And I was particularly pleased that we had experienced practitioners, people who are much sort of newer, younger members of the profession there, and a range of different libraries. No public libraries, actually, but there were, we ranged from the sort of research library end of the spectrum to the community college library, and we had, I think, 2 government library people as well. Yeah. So it was interesting. I haven't analysed the feedback I got yet. I gave them a little paper survey to fill in, asking them to rank them after we'd had some discussion. But we did a quick show of hands against the 10 criteria to see which people had ranked as the top one. So I think the 3 that emerged as the sort of leading ones amongst our list were that a collection should be accessible, it should be discoverable, and it should be extendable. Okay. And that brings in the notion of the collective collection, which of course is something people are talking about a lot now too. Absolutely. But one of the things that we had a lot of debate around was the term relevance. And that's partly because I had provocatively defined that quite narrowly as being giving a sort of part of my rationale for putting relevant in. I had defined it in terms of being relevant to the needs of current students and faculty. So that was provoking a sort of a review of some of the discussion we'd had in the morning about building for posterity as opposed to, selecting for now. So that was interesting. And we also had some interesting contributions on proposing that we ought to, well, not only that, relevant could be defined much more broadly, but suggesting that collections should be anticipatory. And of course, there were different levels of anticipation there. There was the, very practical level. You hear a book come out and be sort of the author maybe be interviewed, and you anticipate that that's something that's going to be in demand in your library, so you buy it before somebody asks for it, at that level. But of course, anticipation is also this idea about building for future needs and trying to spot which books might be really important in the future that maybe are not sort of highly valued now, because they may sort of they may have their day later on. Sure. What was interesting here was people were also talking about the notion of serendipity, that if you have a very broadly based collection and people not too narrowly focused on the current faculty research interests or current curricula, then people may encounter material in their discipline or indeed in other fields that sort of triggers ideas that they hadn't thought about. And it's quite interesting. That made me think of some of the research that I'd read about the experiences of researchers when they were first exposed to these very large journal packages, when their libraries suddenly had all the journals published by Elsevier as opposed to simply the ones that had been selected for their own institution in line with their current needs and priorities. And I think one of the other key things that happened there, of course, was that faculty were moving from searching maybe in a very specialized database to searching these larger interdisciplinary packages, and therefore more likely to encounter ideas relevant to their topic or problem that were where the approach was from a completely different perspective. And so that's interesting that that sort of contemporary development had sort of potentially widened the collection, but then there's another one which is PDA and budget restrictions are potentially limiting choice if we go down that track on books. But of course people are talking about getting rid of the journal packages, getting out of the big deal and moving instead to pay-per-view. And that is a very interesting point about the potential consequences of that.
Did anybody talk about patron-driven acquisitions in your discussion?
We didn't really focus on that specifically, although it was obviously an example of making the collection, more focused as one way of doing it, and one trend, definitely, in practice. Yeah.
Continuing our discussion on collections, a few years ago you were the principal investigator on a funded project that delved into library collections in the digital age. And I was wondering, what did you all learn?
Right. Well, that was interesting. That was a doctoral project, and it was one which I had the opportunity to bid for funding for a special program that was sponsored by the British Library, actually, based on a special relationship that the University of Sheffield had with the British Library. It was called the sort of Concordat. And each year, the British Library offered to fund 2 doctoral student projects for investigations that were related to their collections. Now, mostly, the projects were what you might expect, a typical sort of humanities type investigation, taking advantage of the riches in their sort of special collections of, rare books, manuscripts, and historical materials. But in our case, we were actually building on an initiative that had happened the previous year, when one of my sort of Sheffield colleagues, who headed up our Centre for Enterprise Education, so educating students at all levels and becoming sort of entrepreneurial. And he had some discussions with the British Library about collections to support social enterprise, particularly. So, because that was an area of interest, particular, he was especially interested in. His background was in sociology, and as a result of that, the British Library had funded an internship for a recently graduated MA librarianship student to do an initial investigation of the resources in their collections that supported people interested in social enterprise, which of course is it's an emerging topic, it's an interdisciplinary subject, and so it raised lots of challenges in actually thinking how best to identify and sort of present that material. And so my idea for the PhD project was that we would actually follow on from that work. We'd investigate the concept of the collection in the digital world and use social enterprise as a case study, being an emerging topic and an interdisciplinary topic. And the student I managed to recruit, who was probably I think she was definitely the best of the dozen or so PhD students that I've supervised during my time as a faculty member. She was somebody who had already, worked in academic libraries for a little time, because she had, worked before she went to library school, and then she had had a couple of jobs after that too. So she had enough professional sort of practical background to be able to, really tackle this project in a rigorous way. And she, although I asked the question, right, but she basically designed the project. And it's interesting because some of the approaches she used were ideas that actually came out of my session yesterday. And people said to me at the end of yesterday's session, they said, well, you're asking us as practitioners, to validate your criteria. what about asking library users what they think makes a good collection? And I thought, yeah, absolutely, we must have that dimension into our follow-up work as well, because this is what Anghara did, actually. She surveyed a wide range of stakeholders, of whom professional librarians were only one group, to ask them how they perceived a collection, and it was really interesting. She did actually present twice at the Charleston conference at different stages of her research, and she actually wrote those up for the proceedings. I think she was, yeah. So it's some of her ideas that you can sort of follow up there. But one of the things was, the how people actually just conceived of the word collection. Was it a process? Or a thing,
That's interesting.
or a service.
Yeah.
And she came up with all these different sort of ideas about, based on what stakeholders had said to her. And she produced a number of models as a result of that. And she completed her PhD about a year ago, but having, for financial reasons particularly, to move straight into a very demanding job, she hasn't actually written up the project, for dissemination via a journal yet, which we're hoping to do. But I think it's not time critical in the sense that the ideas that she has are not sort of based in a particular time, though they do reflect how things have moved in the digital world.
Speaking about digitization,
No, go ahead, Jack.
I was just wondering how you think how do you vision it affecting traditional collection development, and even the acquisitions process, because that's, I think, tied to it in a very direct way. Is there still a place in your mind for print collections at this time? If so, is there a time that you see it phasing in or out, or?
Well, I think we can see the shift, is definitely happening. And there are many libraries who now have an e-preferred policy for acquisition.
That's right. Yeah, we do.
I mean, that's been the case for journals for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely.
And for books, I think that suddenly happened in the last few years, that it's become e-preferred. I mean, I've seen the difference even in the short time I've been in Pittsburgh, in that, when I arrived, it was a real bonus if I found one of the books that I wanted to put in a reading list for a course was available as an e-book. And now it's a big surprise when it isn't. That's the way it is. And what's interesting is the way the library has been able to acquire e-copies of even some of the older textbooks that I want to refer students to, like Stanley Sloat's book on weeding. I was thrilled to find that the 1997 edition of that is available as an e-book.
All right.
Yes.
One of my favorites.
Oh, well.
Oh, you triggered my memory.
Yes, well, absolutely, a sort of classic, that one. So I think the shift is happening differently in different sectors. I mean, if we look at things like, special libraries, government libraries, those types of information unit are basically, they're completely going electronic. Apart from any sort of archival material, but all the material that they acquire and use these days is born digital, and that's the way it's going to be. If you look at public libraries, I think there's still a much larger demand for printed material, and I'm certainly still somebody who likes their leisure reading to be hard copy.
Sure.
Though I know a lot of the younger generation, are very happy, and many seem to prefer reading books on Kindles.
Well, I've actually seen in my own practice a certain pushback. And it's almost discipline specific.
Yes.
We certainly,
Yeah.
I of course, went into the ebook programs thinking, oh, everyone will buy into this.
Yeah.
And they did not.
No.
Certainly the sciences were immediate adopters, But the humanities, especially history, English,
Oh yes. Oh,
began to push back.
I've heard that
and
too.
say this is not what we want.
No, I've had discussions with history faculty at the University of Pittsburgh where they have been very worried about the library's shift from print to ebooks. Very worried about it, and feel it's going too fast and it's going too far.
Yeah, that seems to be particularly true with textbooks. Students
Yes.
do not; they prefer print still, and that's
Yes, and that I did not expect either, because I'm always thinking, they're always the younger generation, the millennials and those afterwards, were automatically geared to, but they're not.
Yes, well, it's interesting. I mean, we had, that's obviously come up at the conference as well, and people have been talking about that and saying, well, all else being equal, a lot of people do prefer print, but then things are never equal, like the price for a start. And for me, I do find it so convenient to be able to access ebooks.
Oh, I do too.
Because I'm often find myself preparing my lectures when I'm on the road, and I can't carry a suitcase of texts around with me. So it's really handy to just be able to access stuff online. So I think that academic libraries are going to continue to sort of, shift quite dramatically towards ebooks for practical reasons,
Yes.
if none other. But I cannot see them getting rid of all their print collections, because again, from a practical point of view, they couldn't afford to do that. But it's certainly the case that in many libraries, I think you're seeing a smaller and smaller, proportion of the stock being, a physical collection of books
Right.
in the building. I mean, at
Yeah.
Pittsburgh, we have very high proportion of the book stock now in sort of high density storage, which can be delivered so quickly. I'm just so impressed by it. And they have a service where faculty just click a button and then somebody brings it to your office.
nice. It's a service with a smile.
But that's the way to get faculty to accept the policy, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think another thing that the ebooks are doing, and it's an unexpected, is it's facilitating an awful lot of weeding.
Yes.
A lot of clearing out,
Yes.
of looking at collections in a different way.
Yeah.
And we're not retaining them to keep counts. And I think we're moving away from the idea of counts as a measure of value in a collection. We used to say, we have 5,000 journals.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was a statement of value, but it isn't anymore.
Well, it's fairly meaningless now,
Yeah.
because it's this whole business about how you actually define the collection now. Is it the stuff you have, actually purchased, or is it the stuff potentially available to your users because you have it, available on a sort of, pay-per-view model?
Exactly.
The argument between access and ownership.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
access
it's all become blurred now, hasn't it? Yeah.